So wait, there are elements of his story that you would have never heard if you didn't do this pod?
There's elements of the story that my mom never heard, and she
heard it in the episode.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That and so much more coming right up on today's episode of The Pod Spotter. You're listening to The Pod Spotter. I'm your host, Zach Robidas. There are too many podcasts out there, and that is why we are here. We're going to weed through them. We're going to do the heavy lifting, and we're going to find the good ones for you. And every Monday, we're going to talk to the creators and hosts of those wonderful little pods, and we're going to play clips and have a few laughs. And I hope you subscribe to our little pod and visit us at thepodspotter.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Pod Spotter for extra content and information on upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's really a pleasure. I've been screening hundreds of podcasts. Well, it's been a joke here in Queens, New York. The only cars that you see on the road most days are moving vans. According to the New York Postal Service, there have been over 246,000 address change requests in 2020 so far, an increase of 246% since the same time last year. People are fleeing cities in record numbers, and not just in New York, but all over the country. It's been referred to as the big city exodus. With so much upheaval, people are forced to re-examine their identities in new places they land, what customs await them in their new lives, and what happens to the lives they left behind. These are huge questions when you're crossing state lines to seek refuge in your parents' guest room or that 5-star Dutch farmhouse on Airbnb, but imagine how much bigger those questions become when you must instead flee to a new country, learn a new language, abandon your old career, procure housing, reestablish paperwork, and somehow manage to care for 2 young children while your former life is ravaged by war. Well, on the podcast, on Things We Left Behind, co-writers, producers, and sisters Surer and Saredo Mohamed explore what happens in the hidden afterlife of wartime relocation and what are the different ways your old life shapes the one that you rebuild. Welcome, Surer. Welcome, Saredo. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing this wonderful pod with us. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much. What an amazing intro that was.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I had some reservations about reducing the entire refugee wartime experience to that of New York socialites fleeing New York. But I do often think about how the podcasts we screen, are relatable and universal to everyone, not just anyone just going through this particular situation. And I think that we have a lot to learn from this pod in terms of this upheaval time that everyone is in.
Yeah, it definitely has to be relatable. I think that's why the intro is great. And it kind of shows that nobody thinks it's going to be them until it's them. So yeah. I think that's why we could relate to the intro as well.
And we had a similar intro, actually. For one moment, we actually were talking about like the idea of before items and after items. So the things that suddenly become the makeup of your life now in this pandemic moment, like masks, theater ticket stubs are before items, masks and gloves are after items, right? Like everything's kind of shifted.
Yeah. So why don't we just start with an introduction first and foremost? I think that collaborators, especially like sister duo collaborators, brother collaborators, sort of get lumped together as one thing. The Wright brothers, the Olsen twins. Who are you individually?
Who are we individually? So do you want to go first because you're older?
Sure.
I think that's
oldest first.
Fine,
right. I'll take it.
Take it.
I'm Surer. Surer, I'm a PhD student at Cambridge who is horribly procrastinating her project. And basically, I've come to this whole idea through an exploration. My work has to do with post-conflict reconstruction, but there's so much that you can't say through academic language. They kind of want you to strip out the human beings and replace it with like analytical concepts. And this was an amazing way to kind of have a way to kind of deal with those kind of questions and those stories that you don't get to actually engage in the academic kind of world.
Yes, so that was her. I'm Saredo, also Saredo if you're saying it in English. I'm currently a policy consultant, and I came to London because I was doing a master's degree in international migration and public policy. But before that, I think before anything, we were just kind of writers, people that like to write and read a lot of things. We were always very creative, and we always experienced these kind of issues of migration and loss and all these kind of topics that we explore in the podcast in our personal lives. And so it kind of was a perfect moment in the podcast to be able to bring all those things together and in one kind of platform.
And the podcast is an award winner, or it is contest winner rather, from
Contest
ACAST,
winner, yeah.
UK's very first podcast competition. Tell us about ACAST.
So yeah, the competition was LaunchPod 2019, which was this very funky and super cool competition where they basically just put out a call. ACAST and Listen Entertainment, as a production company, put out a call to say, do you have a podcast idea? And so effectively, we just submitted a little bit of a script, and they produced 3 different pilots, and then picked a winner.
Have you listened to the other 2? Are they any good, the other 2?
They're incredible, yes.
We had no idea. Like, seriously.
They were really good.
Good podcast.
You whooped them. You beat them.
Oh, my God.
Sorry. Yeah, we're not here to
It was
gloat.
difficult, though, because they were incredible. They were absolutely
okay.
incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to the other contestants. But we
Yes.
are here celebrating this pod today. It's
Appreciate it.
funny that you mentioned just the human side of the refugee experience, because I think so many times so much of the conversation around refugees is in terms of numbers and policy and politics. 10,000 here in Greece, 500 kids in cages, and you remove all of that and you're just like, here is human thing. Here is human story.
Exactly what you're saying. I think even in myself and my own academic career, I would kind of go to these classrooms and they would talk about very vague things like, what do we do with the migrants? Where do we put them? And it was kind of just like this block or a mass of people, kind of sounded like zombies that were just like roaming around the earth that we didn't know what to do with. So this was like a perfect opportunity to kind of zoom in on something specific as opposed to seeing people's numbers and kind of more broad, generalizable things, and really say, like, what are the stories behind these people? What are the things that motivate people to pick up and leave everything behind, even if they didn't want to, and even if they had a kind of incredible life in the country of their origin, right? So that's 100% the push away from statistics was a really, really important theme in this podcast.
Now, did I read correctly? Your mother actually has a hard time telling your voices apart.
Yes,
is that
100%?
So anybody listening at home, the sisters do sound incredibly similar, but fear not, even their own mother can't tell them apart sometimes.
100%.
It is not your fault, and we don't expect more from you.
On your pod, you sort of always are like, and this is me, by the way. I'm the one talking now.
It was intentional and definitely deliberate because we just know that, like, sometimes, especially, I don't know what it is, like, you mirror off of each other. And then so you kind of start with like the same speech patterns and like the same like vocal, whatever. Yeah.
How are your roles different in producing this? How did you, what were some of the different aspects that you each individually brought to this?
Our roles are similar, complementary, but also distinguishable. And I'll tell you why. Okay. So we both do all of the writing together. Saredo is really good at putting a lot of the skeleton of the content together. What is the argument that we're trying to do here? Kind of the bare bones. I do a lot of the fluff, the little, like, you know, like a little je ne sais quoi over here,
a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
She fights to keep things into the podcast, and I fight to cut the fat. Like, that's always the struggle that we have. I'm just like, cut the whole paragraph. I want the first sentence and the last sentence, and the rest needs to go. And she's just like, no one will know what this is about. And so we really joke that it's like, if the podcast was just mine, it would just be like abstract sounds and like random questions, and the tone would be coming up and down.
Echoes back and forth.
It would just be like really weird. But if it was Surer by herself, it would kind of be like a lecture.
Yes.
Well, you navigate it beautifully, and I think that episodes are often both things. I mean, you do have the academic, and then you do have the artistry side. But the pod is sort of framed by two personal stories: your parents, your mom and your dad, the pilot and the architect. They're the bookends, and then. But I actually want to start in the middle of your pod because I got some valuable information and advice from a guest on your podcast in terms of just how to talk about the refugee experience from Alice. Who is Alice? And tell me about the parts we don't share.
So Alice Misadvende is also a PhD student. She's a really close friend of mine, actually. And so we started off by having these conversations kind of in kitchen tables and other kind of spaces around things that she would just encounter, right? And she would just be constantly feeding me different stories that I could not believe people would ask her, really intimate details and things like that. And when the concept for this podcast came up, I asked her if this was something she wanted to talk about. And she said, "What does this mean?" And I said, I'm not trying to do exactly what we were doing, right? I'm trying to give you that space to say how you feel about it. And so she is a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. A lot of her family experienced personal violence, right? And she's lost members of her family. And then after a while, she ended up going to Canada, and after a while, and starting a family there and working as a journalist, and then moved to the UK to do her PhD with her boys. And through all of those different things, she started to realize that her story was kind of slipping away from her, in a sense. She was getting these opportunities to go on stage and like speak to people about her experience. And she would notice that people would have like tears in their eyes, but then they would want to know more. And they had this kind of like hunger to know more. And she was realizing she was the one who was going home and feeling like a hangover effectively from having to say this and repeat this and still having to be a mother to her children at the same time.
The pain that Alice would feel in dredging these tales back up again would manifest in very physical ways.
My jaw would hurt. My head would hurt. When you tell a story, even a simple summary, well, let me tell you what happened to me last week. You're not just telling a story in the past, you're telling the story as if it was the present. When you tell a story of what happened to you, especially when it's a very painful experience or gruesome experience or of stories of abuse or stories of pain, the first sort of consequence of this telling of the story is that you're reliving it.
Yeah, I mean, some beautiful stuff. Alice pretty much provides a sort of roadmap for anybody who is talking about this experience. Like, hey, just a disclaimer, we're not going to be talking about machetes and guns and all of that stuff. Like, if you've come for the sort of fetishization of what this is like, you're not getting that here because this has a very real cost in retelling. So I just thought Alice like really just sort of articulated all of that really well and just helped in general just how to have a conversation around these events.
One of the things that we've always found really important is like, even if we're talking about really difficult material that people speak out of their own mouth, we try to do it in the last third of the podcast episode. So that way, at least you have a sense of who this person is outside of that specific experience, right? And that kind of like salacious detail isn't the main thing that you take away from your engagement with that person. You have a context for why it matters. You have a context, you have a relatability, a relationship with them through their telling of other parts of their story that might be more mundane. And you can see why that story matters as opposed to it mattering of its own accord and trying to move away from a place of thinking of it like pity and instead moving to a place of compassion and empathy and being in relationship with people, you know?
Yeah. Well, she also, just sort of talks really well, speaks on the sort of who has the right to hear her story, which I want to play. Let's hear Alice in Parts We Don't Share.
I often make a point to say, I want you to see a bigger picture, to ask questions that are beyond me and my immediate experience.
Alice used to tell intimate details about those parts of her story, but it forced her to regularly rehash things that are difficult to confront, let alone share. She also realized that it obscured other pieces of herself in people's eyes, marking her as a victim in her interactions with others.
At first, I used to just be like, well, let me tell you what happened to me, and then this happened, and then we ran in this place, and then this person died. It used to be very sort of as verbatim as I could.
What happens sometimes when people tell their stories of trauma is they're reduced to one single role, which is the victim, which is someone in this interaction that I could have sympathy for and kind of extract knowledge or information from, and then ultimately just discard and never have to talk to again. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we've been struggling with is also with the podcast was figuring out a way to say gruesome things that happen to people, difficult things that happen to people without reducing them to this one idea of victimhood. I think that's important for us.
I want to talk about comida, which I also learned from her. And that
we did
sort
as
of
well.
Really? You did?
Yeah, we didn't know about it.
We had no idea she was going to say any of that. We're like,
let's listen to Be Strong, and then we'll talk about it.
But there was no space to have these conversations. Because if you start telling someone that you don't know what to do and you don't know how to live with yourself, they say comida. They say be strong. Except that no one says, where am I supposed to get the strength from? My aunt and I have very, very rarely talked about what happened in the genocide. There is nothing to say. There's pain, but there's nothing to say. There is no, what do I say? What do I say? What does she say? And how do I relate to her having lost so many people, her husband, how? There were no words to express what we had just gone through. There is no such a thing. I mean, you could give the details of where you went during the war and how your child was killed and how your other child was killed by your neighbor. You could probably put words on that, but you cannot put words on what you felt, on the feeling of dying, on the feeling of lights going out when you are still standing. There are no words for that. And so when I wrote this article in 2008, I think, I said the Rwandan survivors of genocide, mainly the women, they just smile. And it's that smile that tells you everything about all of the stories that they cannot tell.
That's Alice on not telling stories.
And that was kind of why we've become so obsessed with this question of like what happens after war anyway, because we just found that there were all of these silences that we couldn't account for. There were all of these things that were just peppered through that we couldn't account for. And it's a lot to ask your family to continually do testimony and explain this and explain that. Like they have the same kind of difficulties that Alice is experiencing in that context as well. They don't know where to start or where to stop or how to protect you as their kid. They don't want to like tell you things about the world that you don't need to know about quite yet. Like, right? But then there's obviously questions around like, why haven't I met this person? Where's this person? Where's that person? Why are we here? Like all of these questions just arise, and that silence makes its impression in a way.
And so with our dad, what was really powerful in the pilot episode when we told his story is that we finally, through the interview process, were able to actually say, like, what happened through this point? Okay, what happened right after that? And we really realized ourselves, we actually didn't know the story of his life until we did this podcast, is because we just had like tidbits of stories, but we never really got the context before, what happened afterwards, how he felt about that. And then he kind of became like a full, like, I don't know, almost like a character in the story of his life. That was really interesting.
Was he a willing participant in your pod, or did it take a little arm twisting? Yeah.
So he was semi-willing, I would say. Semi-willing.
Okay.
Willing to talk to us, not willing to talk to you. So it's,
got
it's different in some extent. So he wasn't cagey in talking to us. He just didn't want to seem like a victim to everybody that would listen to the podcast, I think, to that
We
extent.
had to give him assurances about what we were going to do with it. I think that was one of the main things in giving him that comfort, is that what we were trying not to do was to say, this is a string of my father's most difficult moments in his life. Like, enjoy. Like, you know, I don't think anybody would feel comfortable with that amount of private information just floating out in the world without any context. But I think we had this one conversation with him in the pre-interview process where we were basically like, what we want is for this to be a touchstone for other people to see themselves as well, kind of thing. And that we want this to be a space that people can come to and to think through and to say, I understand that happened to me as well. Or I know what that would feel like if that happened to me.
I am young. I'm 22, 23 years of age. I have my whole world in front of me. I'm well paid. I am ahead with my life. Everything that I wanted to have from the age of 6 was just sitting in front of me just to be taken.
There was just one thing missing. Just one thing that would make his whole life fall right into place. A couple years later, when he was 27, he met our mom, Hoya. As he puts it,
that empty spot got filled. And things were getting even better. And your mom was graduating then from the University of Florence. Things were working all right for everybody until one day the whole world collapsed ahead of us.
So wait, there are elements of his story that you would have never heard if you didn't do this pod?
There's elements of the story that my mom never heard, and she
heard it in the episode.
Like there's a story that we talk about in the podcast where my dad goes to a job interview, and basically the interviewer didn't expect him to look the way he looked, and then he wasn't even interviewed. And my mom distinctly remembers him coming back into the house upset, but she had no clue what happened.
I could listen to Dad talk about planes pretty much. I mean, I just want to take him to like an airport lounge and just listen to him talk about flying the entire time. So Pilot is the pilot episode, and it's about a pilot. Very clever, very clever. Yes. Good stuff, good stuff. Also in this episode, we get to hear personally from the two of you and how their story sort of shapes who you are.
We were shaped by the following truths. 1, we are from somewhere that we no longer live. And 2, my parents did things that they can no longer do. As children, my sister and I didn't have the language to comprehend the intricacies of this loss, but it still felt tangible and shaped how we came to understand our roles as daughters in Canada. We had an awareness that everything we had was gained through immense sacrifice and a duty, a pressure, to make it all worth it.
I feel like a lot of the conversation around parenting for Americans is like, follow your dream, do whatever, follow your heart, whatever makes you happy. But you sort of talk about this pressure to make the best from this situation. Yeah.
I think when our parents were younger, they were just individuals and they could do what they wanted to do. But the moment that we all came to North America, to Europe, to Australia, wherever everybody went, you became a collective and your life wasn't about you anymore because the life that was about you is just over and it no longer exists. And so we kind of adopted some of those principles where, of course, you have some things that you're able to do that your parents weren't able to do. But at the end of the day, it should always serve some kind of communal and collective purpose. And that's where I think guilt can also come in with like second generation immigrants, because you feel like other people kind of had to put their whole dream on pause to make sure it worked out for you. So you have to feed back into the family somehow.
When you're a young person and you have this whole image of what your life is going to be, right? Like what your job is going to be, what your family is going to look like, where you're going to live. And somehow none of that turns out, not because of anything that you did or didn't do, but because everything just stopped working, right? And something else is your entire path forward. This whole like living in the West thing, it was never their favorite thing. It wasn't what they wanted. Like speaking English and doing this and doing that. It was always kind of like, yeah, okay.
Aside from, I'd say like movies. My dad always loved like Westerns. Movies, and like any movie with like Al Pacino and like Robert De Niro was his favorite. Yeah. So aside from that, that's his reference to the US, but he never imagined he was going to pack up and live in the US. Like that wasn't
the thing.
His goal.
Right. And so like, it's like the reason why we're here, kids, is because you needed an education. So you better educate yourself and you better get the most education that education ever was, right? Like not just a little bit of learning, but a lot. So, and in that case, like, and then when we got into adulthood, our parents said, goodbye, going back. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and a joy. Have a great one, right?
You stay here. We're going alone.
We
Exactly.
will, if you know where to find us if you need us, kind of thing.
So have you've been back? You went in the pod, you said in 2014. You've been to Somalia? Yeah.
The first time I ever went was 2007, I think.
Yeah.
And then,
but we didn't go to the capital city, so we didn't actually see where our parents are raised then. I think it was a little dangerous then.
Yeah.
So we went to like a smaller city. We went to like the little towns. It wasn't as like dangerous.
Yeah.
But then later in our lives, we kind of went back. Surer went for research often. I lived there for a year. So that was kind of like definitely an interesting experience.
Yeah, you talk about the idea of like having nostalgia for a place you've never been, like going back home to a place that you haven't been to but feel like you have because you've heard it so many times. Like, what is that like? Having nostalgia for a place you've never been must be the weirdest.
It's so trippy. And picture this, and this is kind of what we were alluding to in the beginning of Mom's episode. Like, she'll be like she's having nostalgia for a place she's standing at. Like, she's looking at it, right? And she's like, that used to be like this, but like, do not let your eyes deceive you. It was nothing like this. It was like this. And she was like creating this whole other imagination while she's standing there and pointing at this building and saying, that's what this place used to be.
Yeah.
Which can be so trippy, right? Because you're sitting there and you're just like, I had this idea that when I would finally come here, and you would tell me, this is the place where I went to high school. This is the place where I got married. This is the place where, like, I ate ice cream for the first time with your dad. Like, what I had this idea that finally, when I got to go see it, it would somehow be there.
Mm-hmm. But she was literally standing in rubble.
Yeah.
But she's painting the picture to you like it used to be Disneyland. Like, it used to be all these things, and there's nothing in front of her. There's like broken buildings. There's, of course, new things have been built, but those same buildings have literally collapsed and they're still in that same state. So that's been difficult to see.
Yeah.
Like, people always ask, like, what would you do if you got to go to any time period? And I'm just like, 1980s Mogadishu, no question, right? Because I'm like, I have like, it's not even like a question in my mind because I have this image in my head about what it is and what it was like. And like, just, I want to kind of like walk down the seafront and I want to like get into the taxi and I want to go to like the old, like these buildings that were built like during Italian colonialism in the 1930s. And they're like these huge, like Renaissance buildings in the middle of an African city. Unbelievable, right? Like, I want to see all that stuff and I can't.
Well, a way to revisit that past, you talk about in one of your episodes that in tapes, we learned that a lot of that world has been archived. Tell folks what are the tapes that you share in your episode.
So cassette letters, tape letters, people call them different things. They're basically just like cassette tapes that people would send across long distances to family members. So it was a time in Somalia where telephone was very scarce. So everybody didn't have access to a telephone. And it was really an easy and convenient way to get a message along to someone else. But tape letters, cassette letters are really interesting because unlike maybe like a letter or like a written medium, you're actually able to like hear the person's voice, hear a story, and then they're able to like record over it and send it back to you. And so in our first episode with Nadifa, she actually found letter tapes from her grandmother and from her Father's Day and things like that. And she was able to connect with family members that she never actually lived with or spoke with. So it was a way to kind of travel to the past in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Letter tapes are a form of communication that can work in the place of written letters or telephone, as telephone was emerging in Somalia. But most families did not have telephones. So that was a kind of rare luxury. But most people could afford a recorder and cassette tapes that were sent either by post when the post was working, and then later on during the Somali Civil War when all of that kind of infrastructure collapsed, they were handed from person to person.
Wild to think that was the best form of communication. The other thing you talk about was like censorship. There was censorship in letters that like, you had to be very careful about what was sent back and forth. But tapes they wouldn't listen to, or how did that work?
It's just
Or were
hard.
they safer? Yeah.
So it's like anything could be on a tape, right? So like you could be like have like all of your favorite songs. You could have anything, and with a letter, you can like kind of scan it and say like, this agrees with what our political program says is the truth. That's fine. You can send that. But with a letter tape, you'd actually have to like spend 45 minutes listening to like, now this child is going to read you a poem. Now this child, to see if there's anything subversive just hiding in there. It's just not realistic. So that's how people would end up like hiding their conversations.
Let's hear Nadifa talk about the anxiety around these tapes.
Although Nadifa finds comfort in listening to these family tapes, recording them as a child in Hargeisa was a completely different story.
One of the routine things was that the adults would record and then they would force the children to come and do the greetings as well, or say a little bit from the Quran or say a prayer. So I definitely remember doing that. But I think it was something I resisted. It was something quite nerve-wracking because if you did it wrong, you were laughed at, you were teased. It felt very serious. It felt pressured. It felt like broadcasting. You knew that it would be passing through many hands, and you mispronounce things, or you say things wrong, or you feel shy, and all of that is captured on the tape.
Will we hear any of the tapes in season 2?
Maybe we will. We might share some of our families because through the process of making the podcast, we discovered that there's actually a lot in our family. Our mom had some, our dad had some, and she said that they were in our house in Canada, which we haven't gone to in a minute. So maybe we will. Like, I think it would actually be interesting. So to actually hear what they would sound like in our own family archive.
I just want to hear them, to be honest. I haven't heard them before.
What did she say? What did she say? What's on them?
She keeps a lot of things. And so we always had a whole bunch of tapes and CDs. So I feel like it's somewhere in the middle of that we might find maybe like a confession of love or something. But we'll have to dig through it.
Is that what you're holding out for?
We want a good love story on season 2. So
that's what we're hunting for.
Yeah.
Could it also be part of that thing that you talk about where it's like, well, she doesn't want to talk about it? There's a percentage of folks that are just like, nah, you mention your aunt at one point. It's just like, why bring this up?
So there's different reactions to like nostalgia, right? So some people, some aunts and uncles will get around and they just want to talk about everything that's ever happened in their lives. And remember that time? And do you remember that? And you can even be like traumatic stories, somewhat traumatic stories of like crossing the border
but
like,
always told as a joke.
But it's always told as a joke because it's supposed to be funny. But then there's some people that you can see their faces changing and they'll be deeply uncomfortable and they'll be like, why do we always have to talk about this? It wasn't fun for me. Like I didn't like that moment, So it depends. I think most people actually just like they kind of just do it in jest and they have a lot of like funny stories about it. But like some people don't even like the funny stories. Like they just like to pretend like nothing ever happened and they're here now and they just kind of emerged in their 40s in the UK. Like
I was born like this, 40 and ready to go. I guess that's how, it's just the various ways everyone deals with trauma. You talk about there are just weird ways of dealing with trauma and one successful way that people have found is just laughing through it. I laugh about it.
Actually, so this didn't actually make it into the episode because it was so tonally inconsistent. But we had this moment in the studio where
with
Alice, where we all just started laughing. Like not even a little bit, like barely laughing. Because we were started by talking about how weird it is that so many times the stories that we end up telling or hearing are actually really horrible stories, but they're framed in this kind of like jesty way, like kind of thing, like, ooh, I didn't know he was hiding behind the door, but then it happened that I was in the other door, and then like, and now we're fine, and that's fine, kind of thing, And
it's funny because everybody's fine at the end.
That's why it's funny.
But when you think about it, it was a terrible story. It was a horror story, but it's funny to us now.
Yeah.
Like,
so she started we told the story of my dad. Like there was an explosion in Mogadishu, and I just check in obviously every time something happens just to like make sure and stuff. So he's like out of breath and he's just like, I was close by, and I was just like, oh damn, okay. He's like, I'll call you back later. Later, like 2 hours later, he's laying prone on his friend's couch, and he's telling this joke about how he's just like, there was this tiny little crack in this wall. And I just had to squeeze myself through it. He's a bigger guy now. It's like, I had to squeeze my way through it. And I'm sure I made that hole bigger on my way out, but I got out. So I told that story in the studio with Alice. She told a different story. And we just had this very bizarre moment where all three of us were just laughing. And then it's kind of turned around to where, like, why is laughter the medium of that? Why does it become laughter? And Alice had this really wonderful point that we think like could like be a whole thing in and of itself, which is like often you have all of this energy when you're thinking about difficult things, right? And it's gotta go somewhere. You've gotta like get it out of you, right? And you're not gonna cry because that makes everyone uncomfortable. And you're probably not in a place where you want to be in connection with all of that stuff anyway. So laughter becomes a really easy way to kind of get that energy out, right? And if you can laugh at something, you can feel like you're in control of it, like you have power over it somehow, right? Yeah. So even though like it's really scary to have been in the context of an explosion, like, and it just happened right in front of you and you actually had to physically like squeeze yourself through a thing to get out. It's better if it's funny, right? At least like it's better for everybody, especially when you're trying to speak to your children and explain what that was like, or like that you're fine. It's better for everybody if it was funny.
And it's funny because I only registered that as a funny story. I
didn't think of it as a scary story.
And then until we looked back and then I was like, whoa, that was heavily traumatic. But the way the story was told to me was so funny from my dad about his like escapade through the city and like running through cracks and things. I was just like, oh yeah, that funny story. And then we looked back and we're like, not funny. Not funny, actually.
On
not
paper,
funny.
That is a tragedy on paper.
That's a tragedy. That's
an almost tragedy. It's funny because everybody's okay.
It's funny.
Least, in our family.
I want to play one more from Aya Nadifa because I think she's the original podcaster. Aya Nadifa is Nadifa's grandmother, was it?
Yes.
Aya Nadifa made her tapes her own.
She made perfumes, she read fortunes, she cooked various foods, she sang in Arabic even though she didn't understand the language. So someone like her, it's a different ballgame, I think. And with her tapes, she has these she'll begin the recording with a long poem to my father or to one of us, or just talking about how much she misses us. And then she'll go into kind of family news. She's often trying to give solace, I think, and saying, don't worry about me, everything is fine, everything is good, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. So for her, I guess it was a form of mothering still. She was still trying to mother.
I love hearing about those tapes.
Yeah.
Nadifa kind of talks about this. The sort of idea of being able to improvise in times of adversity is super, super important. And she points out that, sometimes that the roles are reversed with people. People that were once reliable are now not reliable. And people that had it all together don't know what to do at this time. And so it's interesting to hear your ability to improvise is unsurprising. Let's hear from Nadifa one last time from her episode in The Tapes.
In any circumstance, in everyday life, some people are more reliable than others. And in a war situation, sometimes that's switched. The person that you thought was really flaky and, disorganized or rebellious is the person that suddenly is awakened and is very good in emergencies. And the person that had been reliable is not reliable anymore.
In our mom's family, like she was the second youngest. And it's not that they didn't think they could rely on her, but she was just the youngest. She was just the one that they would send money to. They would send money to her. They would send clothes to her. They would make sure she's okay and her tuition is paid and all these things are done. And now all of a sudden she's in Europe while everything's happening in Somalia. And she's the point person. She's the person that needs to make sure that everybody's okay, that everybody's getting money, that everybody's able to get out. And it's like your role completely switches and it's a really rude awakening to some people.
Yeah. Hold that thought. We will be right back. We are here to fill the role of looking for great content for you. Let us do the dirty work. Check us out, subscribe, visit us at thepodspotter.com and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for lots of good stuff. And please, if you haven't already, leave a review. It really helps. Subscribe, rate, review, judge, do all the things that podcasts ask you to do. We release every Monday with a review of a great new pod, and we're just going to keep on going here. So please keep listening. If you have suggestions for us for pods to feature, drop us a note on any social platform. Just drop us a note anyway. Just say hi if you want to. And you can do that at thepodspotter.com. Well, You'll notice a big wall of pod swag behind me, and I'd like on things we left behind to also make the wall. If you're up for it, I have a sweatshirt here. This is that next time you visit Columbus, Ohio, you can wear this hoodie. We had a hoodie made on things we left behind, a little pod swag, and we'd like to present it on the wall for all of time. If you answer these 3 trivia questions, are you ready?
Okay, we're playing.
The stakes are much higher now. Okay,
Okay, let's do this.
We hear from Columbus. We hear a lot about Columbus, Ohio in your pod and Mogadishu. And so these questions are geography questions.
Oh, no.
If you're ready.
Okay.
Oh no!
All right.
Actually, oh yes, we will rise to the occasion because
That's
I
right.
don't.
You will, right.
Yes, I rise to the occasion.
Rise
yes.
through adversity. Yes.
I'm crumbling already. I don't know about her.
No, we're gonna get through this. That sweatshirt will be on that wall.
Okay.
I hope so. Question number 1. True or false? Mogadishu has 2 times the population of Columbus, Ohio. 2 million versus just under 1 million.
Okay.
True or
Let's think
false?
this through.
Okay.
Mogadishu
Yeah.
has 2 million is the claim.
That's
Okay,
the claim.
population of Somalia is what, like 11 million? Around there? Does it make sense for 2 million people to be Mogadishu?
Why don't I know this? My PhD is on Mogadishu. This is a
This is
problem.
a PhD student, guys. It's okay. I'm not any better. Okay.
It's not on Columbus. Wait, Columbus, Ohio doesn't have 1 million people.
It might. Columbus is actually a very large city. But
Columbus
it can't.
had like 300K max.
How many? Okay. Okay.
No way.
Columbus
Does Columbus,
could.
Ohio have 1 million
Columbus could. I think Columbus could.
people? So what do you think?
Okay. Because think about it. If London, Ontario
Okay.
has 300,000, Columbus, Ohio has to be at least 3 times the size.
This is a look into the creative process of the
Yes.
sisters working on it.
This is exactly what it's like.
I'm going to say true. Because
Yeah.
that would be really hard to come up with.
Ding, ding,
Thank
ding,
you.
ding, ding. True it is.
We did it. We did it.
You're both kind of right, though. It's not 1 million. It's just under 1 million. It's like 900,000.
Okay. All right.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
Cool.
Chill.
Now I know more things I should know.
Yeah. Number 2. Columbus, Ohio and Mogadishu are both capitals. But while Ohio was founded in the 1800s, the other can be traced back to what century?
Wait, Columbus, Ohio isn't the capital. Is it?
It's the capital of Ohio. No?
Oh, yeah.
I thought.
There are no gotcha questions.
Oh,
There are no trick
I thought
questions.
you were gonna get us with the
Oh,
gotcha.
no, Stinky. No,
See,
no.
okay, so never mind. Columbus is the capital. Okay.
Yeah. 100%. So what century was Mogadishu founded? Is the question.
Yes.
It can be traced back to.
Yeah.
Okay. This I actually,
Within a couple centuries is fine.
This is
Okay.
her.
This is the
ladies and
PhD.
gentlemen. Okay, let's
Okay.
go.
It's hard to say
Mm.
because I'm an academic. So here's the thing. It's been rumored to be a lot of things. The Ibn Battuta in the 13th century did go, so it's at least that far back. I don't know when it was founded.
Bet she didn't know that, Zach.
Probably not. I knew very
I didn't either,
little.
but it's okay.
So say a number that's less than 13 and we'll rock it.
I have a strong feeling about the number 12 right now, or 11. Which one? 11 or 12?
I'm gonna use his facial expressions as a cue.
Nope.
I know, I'm just kidding. Do you want to just try 13?
Yeah,
Let's go
say
with 13.
Say
13.
Just the 10th century.
Oh, very
Founded
close. You
in
did a
the
great
10th.
job.
Really
I was not going to
nice.
say that. You
Lower
did a
than
great
13.
job.
She knew lower than 13.
That was great. That was really good.
All right. That's like 1.5. We're calling it 1.5.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
All
you.
right.
Because the
That
logic
is
was
going to
she
be the
showed her
tiebreaker
work.
here.
I showed
yeah,
my work.
You
She showed
did.
her
You
work.
did.
Okay.
The academic. Last question. Mogadishu boasts a balmy average of 85 degrees Fahrenheit. But
Oh, Fahrenheit.
What's Celsius?
the average
Fahrenheit.
low in Columbus, Ohio is in the 20s, 30s, or 40s. The temperature, average
Are you talking
low
about
Okay,
Fahrenheit.
this is Fahrenheit.
degrees Fahrenheit.
We don't know
yes.
Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit
Oh,
to
shoot.
Celsius. You got to help us out,
This is a
man.
problem.
You got to
I'm
help
gonna
us
have
out.
to
We
Google
can't
it.
Google it because then it's going to be a question.
We can all
It'll
Google
be-
it.
It'll be questionable for us to Google it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm not going to
You
Google
don't
it.
Google it.
I'm not going to Google it.
I don't want to put our good name in disrepute.
I would never do that. I would never.
Freezing is 30 something in Fahrenheit. No,
Not a math. I'm a theater major. I don't know.
We're done. We're done. This is not for us.
it's a minus. It's a minus something.
It can't be a minus.
Average low in Columbus. Do you remember that snow?
What's the average low in London, Ontario?
I
Do
compare
you remember
London,
that?
Ontario.
How much time did you spend in Columbus, by the way? The pod made it sound like it was your grade school years.
Yeah, it was elementary school.
Elementary school.
Elementary school,
Yeah.
bit of middle school for her, and then
Yeah.
we moved to London, Ontario.
So it was, for me, it was like 5 to 12, ages 5 to 12. So like super formative.
Formative
you know?
years, yeah.
But yeah, not enough for me
Cold.
to continue to retain Fahrenheit. Clearly.
No, God, no. It just got cold. It just got cold.
It was cold.
I'm skipping
right.
this question because I don't even,
It's
I
okay.
can't even.
I appreciate that.
Sorry, it was a great question
such
for
a good
other
question.
people. It's just we're
Forget it. I don't know what I'm doing here. 20. I just don't know math.
Yeah.
that's
Where
how we
was
got
I?
him.
Okay, you got me. You beat me. Not
I
knowing
can't
that.
count either.
Ohio, it's on average 20 degrees. It gets down to 20.
That's what I was gonna
degrees
say.
Fahrenheit.
I was literally gonna say that right
It's
now.
absurd.
So
How did
I wasn't,
your
but
poor
still.
parents? You're used to 85.
Columbus is cold.
Columbus is cold. You're gonna need
Columbus
a
is
sweatshirt.
cold.
I should send
That's-
this sweatshirt.
To them, right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's
Oh.
going on the wall with 1.5 questions correct. On things we left behind
so much.
is making
Thank
the
you.
pod wall somewhere.
Wow.
The generosity of your spirit
Rapidly
in that
filling
regard.
up. I don't know that a pod. Well, to be fair, I don't know that a pod's never made the pod wall. All pods make the pod wall.
But
Even if
imagine
you were-
us being the first one that doesn't make the podcast.
Wouldn't have
Like,
happened.
how would that feel for us, right?
Guys, we have to talk about mom. We have to talk about the architect.
Let's do it.
Your mom has one of the sound bites that stuck out to me was her compassion for Italians that didn't understand what she was going through. She was like very like, look, I didn't care about this until it happened to me directly, and so I have compassion for you. Let's listen to a bit from the architect.
The
people that used to be your friends, even the ones you used to hang out with, they can't understand your new reality. Did they change? No. Are they insensitive? No. Your circumstances have changed. From this to this. The Italians that I knew had some awareness that the war happened, but didn't know anything about what that meant. And I can't blame them, because that's how I used to think before it happened to me. I didn't know what war was either. Before that point, I remember seeing old Eritrean people in Italy and wondering what they were doing there, why they didn't just retire in their own country with their own people. Now I understand. Unless it happens to you, you can't understand the consequences of war and what it means.
When you just think about how much things like just changed in the COVID period, like who would have imagined like one day you're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to be lining up for an hour just to get one pack of toilet paper if you can find it, or to not know if they'll be able to see their neighbor in a long time, or to not know what happened to people. And so if people can remember the early times of COVID just for a moment and think about how uncertain everything was, how you didn't know what was going on, how it seemed like it just like got you in like a span of a day. I think that in some ways can reflect what that could be like when someone's like leaving a war scenario, or when someone is seeking asylum in a new country. It's just all new to you. You're an adult. Of course, you have logical thinking and you can like figure things out, but like the whole context has changed. And you never imagined that you'd have to figure out the things that you're figuring out now.
I just want to hear Dad's sort of advice to folks and his mentality at that time, which I think is also helpful for right now.
I was pregnant and I was scared. And it was your dad who reminded me that my fear was misplaced. He said, everybody is born with their fate.
While this may not have been the fate she planned for, it was the one she had.
Did your parents, what was their support group at that time? Who did they have?
Each other?
Yeah,
I'd
it sounds
say each
like
other.
they were just each other's.
I think that's all you can
Wow.
have, because they moved to Italy and they had some people there. But I think especially when they moved to Canada, and we mentioned it like slightly in the podcast. So a lot of our family in Canada was in Toronto, and my mom was all the way on the West Coast in Vancouver. So they knew one or two people there because they also got asylum there. But like, I think other than your immediate family who isn't with you, probably your spouse. I think that's the only person you'd be able to really talk to. And even in that time, even though that would be the person that you can talk to, you don't have time to talk, right? Because people, when they're in the middle of something, don't have time to sort it out and figure out how they feel about it. They have a night shift to go to, or they have something to go figure out, and somebody has to pick up the kids. And so you don't really have moments of reflection in that time. And so I think they both just have this unspoken thing that they both know they went through and they got stronger together through. But even at the time that the war happened, they've only been married for like 6 months at that point. So it wasn't like they had like this whole married life and then they knew how to live together and they knew all these things. They were already figuring out how to be a married couple. And then in the middle of that, like right when that started, all of a sudden you have to pick up and move and drop all your careers and like take your one kid from Italy and move to Canada. And
now we have another one.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Can you, it's foolish of me an hour in to be asking this, but can you clarify that for me? Just the sort of where they end up, where they go first. It's Italy, it's Canada, it's Ohio.
It's so all over the place. So no, you go for it.
Okay.
You know how to do it.
I'd start in Somalia.
Yeah.
Everybody's in Somalia. Our parents are in Somalia. Our families are in Somalia, everything. But the war happened at a time that my mom was in Italy and my dad was in Somalia. This is right when they were, after they got married. My mom thought she was going to go back to Somalia, but in that moment of separation, the war happened. So my dad did his own kind of excursions in Somalia. He went to Kenya first on a boat, and then he went to maybe Uganda, and then he found his way to Europe, and then they reconnected there in Italy. And then afterwards, Italy wasn't, although they've lived there and they spoke the language, it wasn't like a place to start a family for them because it didn't actually have like social services. It wasn't ideal for them.
And they didn't have actual status yet.
Yeah. So
that was going to be a big
there were nobody. And so they decided to move or seek asylum in Canada. So they moved to Canada. So we started from Somalia, Italy.
Sorry, one important thing.
Oh, she was born in Italy. I should say that point. My sister, my fabulous sister, who we love dearly, was born in Italy.
She's Italian. Yes.
Yes.
I actually am
She's
not.
not Italian.
No, not Italian.
Yeah, they don't
No.
do birth citizenship. They were just like, yeah, this kid was born here, but she's not one of us. So,
So she was like technically Somali when she was born, even though.
Okay.
Yeah. So they moved to Canada. I was born in Canada.
Wait.
Okay. Sorry, she was there. I wasn't.
So Italy apply for refugee status.
Yes.
I'm born in the interim, so that happens. And then they apply for Canada, and then they get settled, like because they get to decide. The government gets to decide where you live, right? When they're giving you refugee status, so they settle them in Vancouver, British Columbia, West Coast. Right?
Wow. Okay.
Which is where Saredo is born.
That's me.
It's where we live from until 1998. So that's like 5 years.
And then afterwards,
it's 1998. My parents had this pact between them, right? That they would, whoever basically was able to get back into their profession first, that would be the one that the other spouse would support. And then my mom gets this job opportunity in Columbus, Ohio. And that's when the decision is made that the pact comes into full force. My mom got her job before my dad got his job as a pilot. Wow. So he would be the one who kind of like took care of us and like kind of played a secondary role while my mom followed her career, right? So then we all moved to the States, lived there for a while. And then in 2005, we moved back to Canada, right?
Got it. Let me drop in your mom learning to get qualified again in that time.
Hoya was trained in architecture in Florence, which is kind of like learning to code in Silicon Valley. If you're gonna do it, that's the place. But in Florence in those days, they trained the old-fashioned way, with pen and paper. By the time Hoya started working in Canada, the digital revolution had come to architecture. All of a sudden, she was behind in her career, too.
When you're a dreamer and you show up in North America thinking
everything will be like, no.
In the first year, you're thinking, okay, I'll learn this skill, get this job, sit in an office.
But I know, it's a long way to go.
Hoya didn't have the money to take English classes and the computer software classes she needed. And the support from the government wouldn't cover both. 1 million layers of red tape stood between Hoya and her career. After a year of chasing credits, computer classes, and unpaid internships, she managed to get qualified again.
Yeah, it's just the fact that she's trained in architecture in Florence. Nope, sorry. Yeah, you don't. It's not good enough.
It's just kind of like, can you like put a Canadian spin on this?
Yeah.
Like, can you?
Jeez.
But a big difference between our parents' experiences as well is when my dad came, he spoke English already, but my mom didn't speak English. And so that was also another barrier. And on top of the barrier of the fact that she has 2 small children, and that's usually what women would end up having to do, that kind of domestic work and stay at home, even if they do have a career.
Yeah.
So gendered labor falls that way generally.
Yeah. So I think my dad had some kind of head start that my mom didn't have in those 2 kind of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to hear you talk about, okay, I'm born here, went here, come down here to Columbus, go up here. And at no point, like in your introduction, did geography define who you were. You don't introduce yourself as that. And it's just interesting to like a New Yorker who like, it's like the first thing that I'll rattle. Like, well, I'm an actor, I'm from New York, and it is a part of my identity. And so I guess there is a question here. It's just how do you think about geography in terms of your identity? And does it define any characteristic of who you are? What pieces of these places have you taken with you?
What an amazing question,
Yeah.
first of all. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I'm an amalgamation of a lot of different kinds of places and times at the same time.
Yeah.
We understood ourselves to be American kids, even though we were never actually American, right? Because those were formative years that we were growing up there. The Canadian relationship is obviously the connections and the family and the friendships that we've created during that time. Like I'm indebted to Canada so much for like now as a PhD student in the UK, I can see that the education system was incredibly important to my understanding of self and developing into the kind of person that I wanted to be. And the budding arts scene and all of that stuff was really important to me. Somali is who I am in a more fundamental kind of way, which is like the language of home, the relationship, that kind of like always recurring understanding. It's more than just culture. It's identity in the deepest kind of form and sense.
One interesting thing that I think happened for my mom, because she ended up moving so much, when she finally kind of settled down in like, I'd say like Columbus, Ohio, or even London, Ontario, is that she ended up keeping a lot of things that she didn't have to keep anymore. And so I would come back and be like, Mom, you don't need this in the basement anymore. And she'd be like, yeah, let's keep it. Not in like a hoarding way. So like disclaimer, like in just like, you don't want to get rid of your possessions, because for so long you were just kind of on the move and you're going from this place to that place. And it's like, now I have a house, and if I want like too much furniture, I can have too much furniture because this is all my furniture. And I don't want to get rid of it. And everything is important to me. Right. So some people become, I think they don't want to hold on to things, and nothing becomes really important to them. Photo albums, they don't want to look at them. Some people, like my mom, she wants to collect everything. Everything's important to her as some kind of like memento or something. That's why even when my dad gives me career advice, it's not just about like what pays the most money or what does this. It's like, what's a job that you can keep for a long period of time that will make you rooted and stable and that you won't have to worry about, you know?
In all of the places that you lived, where was, I guess, in growing up in America primarily, like how was that sentiment different than the kids that you were growing up around? You know, this idea of like, you need to just be worried about education. You just need to worry about, things that you can take with you. Like, was that in opposition with what you felt was going on around you? Or, everyone pretty much wants the same thing.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think because we had a lot of like different circumstances. So in Columbus, Ohio, we were in an elementary school, it was a predominantly Black elementary school, but they were African American. They weren't immigrants, right? So even there, you could have kind of like differences between, even though people may look like you have completely different experiences, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's on the same page. And then it was a really different experience when we moved to London, Ontario, because it was like a predominantly white school, and it was like we jumped from like Columbus, Ohio to London, Ontario, and the whole demographic was completely different. But there we may have had some kind of like more experiences with immigrants. So even in that circumstance, we may have felt closer to them because there was maybe more of a Somali community like right next door to us. But yeah, I think growing up, when you can tell that some of the things that you care about, everyone else around you doesn't necessarily care about. I think our parents always wanted us to be able to talk to anybody. That's a great characteristic of my dad, is that he's able to talk to anybody about anything for a long period of time, kind of because he was a cab driver for a long time. And so you can just kind of pick up small talk and conversation with everybody. So I think in that way we were able to reach across the aisle and speak to anybody, even if we didn't have kind of similar backgrounds or experiences. I think that's something that was passed down through that.
Why is it important for these stories to be told? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I think it's important for these stories to be told for different reasons for different groups of people. For people who are from affected communities, I think it's really critical to be able to start the really difficult process of thinking through what happened and what it meant in a way that doesn't necessarily dredge up the worst memories and the worst parts of the past, but starts to put a name to some of those processes and some of those experiences and starts to think through what comes next and how to actually, what to do with all of these different diverging truths, and making a connection and showing that these conversations can be had in a way that hopefully doesn't sensationalize the stories, doesn't make them out to be victims without agency, doesn't make it out to be these tragedies, but instead as real life, hard, but real stories. And for to be able to see that those conversations can happen in a way that hopefully has a lot of respect behind it, and that people who experienced it can kind of comment on it and think through their own experiences through that lens, and that their children can start to get a sense of what lies behind that wall of silence that might be filling their house, you know? Mm-hmm. There's also a need and a space to be able to think about what the consequences of those kinds of determinations and decisions can be, right? Mm-hmm. We're standing here in the way that we are because of a particular policy decision that was made in Canada, right? Those were downstream effects, not just for my family, parents, but for us individually as well. Like that has had a material consequence on just our lives, and we didn't go through anything. Right. And anybody can connect to these stories. You don't have to have had that in your personal background or in something that you even recognize. Like you said, like there's so many connections. Everybody knows what it's like to have disappointed hopes, right? To have romantic entanglements that go wrong, to have jobs that you thought you would get that you didn't end up getting. To
have expectations have to be derailed. Yeah.
Disappointed, right? Yeah. Dashed hopes. There's genres of literature about dashed hopes. This is just a contribution to that, right?
Are you able to tease anything for a second season? If you could write your second season right now, what are some of the stories you're interested in?
I don't think we have any particular stories, but I think one thing that we really want to do is kind of go beyond a Somali context. I think the reason is because there's so many countries that have experienced very similar things to Somalia in even more like recent years. So I think it was kind of just easiest for us to start off in our own families and our own homes. And it was also kind of like a good faith offering because we were able to show in our own family how we would interact with these stories. So if we didn't do that to our dad or our mom, why would we
do it to your dad or your
to
mom?
Anybody else's, right? But I definitely want to go beyond a Somali context to look at different contexts as well. We did that a bit in this one. We spoke to someone from Rwanda, someone from Afghanistan, but I'd say that's something that I'm really hungry for, is to kind of look at these things from like a more international perspective.
If there was one piece of audio that could be used at the Podcast Hall of Fame when you are inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame, and there's that kiosk and you're standing there on the Things We Left Behind display as people approach and hit the button to play that piece of audio, what piece of audio from season one would be playing?
I think I already know, actually.
Do you? Okay.
I think I know. So I think it would be actually the pilot episode. And I think it would be the last things that our dad said in the pilot episode, which is that we kind of close off the episode. And please forgive me for paraphrasing. It's better to just listen to it. But it's just something along the lines of never stop dreaming for a better life. And I think that was kind of like the moral of the story and what he was able to get from the whole situation that he went through, which is at the end of the day, even though everything was against me, the odds were against me, never stop dreaming for a better life. Never stop being naive enough to think that something better will happen, even if it won't.
What I learned was what I always told you. Look forward. Look for the future. The sky is the limit. Never, never stop dreaming. Even though I was going against the headwinds and everything, against everything else, I never, never for a minute stopped dreaming. Never. Never stop dreaming for a better life.
I like that. Yeah.
It's awesome advice.
Yeah.
It is the last 5 minutes of our podcast. I don't know if anybody warned you, but in the last 5 minutes, basically use this time to do whatever you'd like. Recite a poem, tell off a former boss, reveal an embarrassing secret, or tell someone you love them, or just do nothing. Hum a tune, whatever you want. But it is the last 5 minutes. No one is listening to the podcast anymore. They've fallen asleep. So the time is yours to do with whatever you want. And I found my copy, my liberal arts major. Actually, my brother sent me this of, do you know this book, Banthology?
No.
Banthology. Oh, it's 9. It's stories from banned nations.
We should read that. That's so good.
Yeah, no. So these are just nine human stories from each nation. And I'm going to read. I'm going to virtue signal and say, yes, I had this book. And I want to actually read a little bit from this is Bird of Paradise and Rihanna Mamoun's section here on Bird of Paradise. I'm using my last 5 minutes to read from this book. I used to wish I'd be born in the form of a bird, awash with color like a bird of paradise. Those delicate and beautiful little things. I loved their sublime voices and the way the sun glinted off their brilliant blue feathers. They arrived at certain times of year, visiting us at dawn and at dusk, lingering for a while in the neem tree in our front yard. I would sit on our doorstep for hours, listening to their beautiful song as they flitted from branch to branch. They were a sweet blessing, and there was something so reassuring about their coming and going each year. I genuinely believed they came from paradise, and that the gap between their appearance and disappearance was the distance between the earth and the heavens. I dreamed of becoming a bird of paradise, resplendent with colorful feathers, a beautiful head, black eyes, and powerful wings. I hid this wish deep down inside myself, seeking comfort in my imagination whenever I felt sad or lost. That's Rihanna's Bird of Paradise.
That was beautiful.
Wow.
Yeah. But you can tell us an embarrassing secret. It doesn't have to be heavy or poetry. Or you could just, tell us about your day. It's the last 5 minutes.
I'd like to ask you a would you rather, if that's okay.
I love a would rather.
So we're going to turn it on to you, if you're ready for this.
I feel ambushed. I feel ambushed. This feels prepared.
It's just like we're just going to feel you out. We're just going to see.
Hang on. Let me have
where
some
you stand.
Hang on.
Need some coffee.
It's a setup job.
So one of my favorite things is would you rathers, especially when you don't really know somebody, because it really lets you know like the core of the person, like in a random scenario.
It's like flight or invisibility. That one.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But this one is kind of more of a scenario. So this one I have to credit Kate and Lucy, who I work with, because they asked me this at lunch back when lunch at offices was a thing pre-COVID. And
can we get back to that?
I love them. They're great. So I'm going to ask you this.
Okay.
So you're in this universe, right? And you have this option where you can get hooked up to a machine, right? And once you're hooked up to a machine, you're hooked up to that machine for the rest of your life, right?
Great. Okay.
You have no sense of what's going on. You're just laying on a table. There's just like things plugged into you and all that type of stuff. You're zoned out. But when you're zoned out, it's like the best thing ever. It's like love and happiness and euphoria and like the best thing ever that's ever happened to you all the time for the rest of your life. So in the simulation, it's incredible. Like, and because we're like, you could say like, oh, but you don't want to be happy all the time because it doesn't mean anything. They'll like bring you down just a little bit, just to take you back up, just a little bit, but then they'll bring you right back up. So you really appreciate it, right? That's in the simulation.
Okay.
Would you like to do that simulation forever? Or would you just like to be in real life?
Oh my gosh. That's really hard.
She asked me earlier today, and I was like, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the 5 minutes.
If you had that choice, and the people you love now can maybe in your mind be there. So your wife could be there and your kids and like, but it's the simulation.
It's controlled. It's just controlled.
Yes. Yeah. And there's like scientists doing things.
It sounds really not. I mean, it's, man, it's basically life. That's basically what life does. It just kind of, every time it's trucking along, something comes along to bring you down a little bit. And like your dad, you just have to keep smiling and keep going. It's not so much of a departure. I guess the only thing is they control how high I get. They control the ups. And
but they're always you can trust them. They're always gonna make it great.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I
They will.
Can I
In
trust
this
them?
scenario,
No, but I get
it's
that.
always
No,
great.
but this is part of the uncovering because I also have that suspicion because I can't give you just some random person control over all of my feelings and understandings. You get me?
I think that it's a hard pass because my baby wouldn't be hooked up to the same machine and I wouldn't be able to smell that baby's head. I'd be able to smell some like fake version of my baby's head.
Exactly.
And I'd know the difference.
You'd know.
Yeah.
What would you do it?
Oh no, I would never do it. It sounds terrible.
No.
It's like it's not
It
real.
sounds,
It's
it
not
actually
real.
sounds a lot like LA. It's like every day is just like 85 degrees. Occasionally it dips a little to like 70 just so you kind of remember what a perfect day is. And then right
Nice
back
little
up to
palm
85
tree.
and perfect. Yeah. And so no, I'm a New Yorker. I don't want to be in LA forever.
Okay.
You need
it
the
gets
snow
old.
to
You need it all.
appreciate the sun.
Without the sour, the sweet don't taste as sweet, baby. That's it.
Exactly. I haven't seen the sun in 3 months, and I probably won't in another 3 months. But I will appreciate the sun when it finally comes out in the UK eventually.
I hope that means you're podcasting. I hope that means you're working on season 2. Where can people listen and like and subscribe and do all the things that they should do for podcasts?
So if you want to listen, you can listen on Acast and you can listen on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Twitter on Things We Left and on Instagram On Things We Left Behind.
We love your pod around here, and we do thank you for sharing it.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
This has been the Pod Spotter, where we showcase the pods that you need to know about. But if you have one that we should know about, let us know via thepodspotter.com or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram @thepodspotter. Thanks, y'all. This has been Zach Robinos. The Pod Spotter is created by the Price Brothers, produced by Oink Inc. Radio, associate producer Tori Adams, and is recorded and produced at Baker Sound in Philadelphia.